Hi listeners, Jason here. We're on the countdown to PHSCon 2025, where we bring some of the leading experts on the topic of psychosocial safety to Sydney for 2 full days on the 19th and 20th of June. With so many great speakers, industry case studies and networking opportunities for the 500 people in attendance, it is the psychosocial safety community event of the year. Highlights will surely include live podcast recordings with Adam Grant and Professor Rob Reiner, international insights from Mary Ann Bainton, Dr. I. David Daniels, Peter Kelly from Canada, the US and UK respectively, as well as entertainment from Jimmy Reese OAM. That's right, we've even got Jimmy Giggle. Early bird pricing is available for a limited time, so get in quick to secure discounted tickets for the conference, pre-conference masterclasses and the VIP dinner. Now, on to this episode.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Ian Lewis, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. I'd like to tell you that I'm coming from Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. And in Canada, we acknowledge our indigenous peoples. And so I'm in Treaty 4 territory. It's the ancestral lands of the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota people. And it's the homeland of the Métis. I'm so pleased to be able to be on the land, to live, practice, and enjoy the land, and integrate reconciliation into my practice. So thankful to have Megan Hunter joining us today from Calgary. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you so much, Ian. Thank you. And I would like to acknowledge in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, and honor and acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Calgary, also known as Kansas, on the Treaty 7 territory, which is the traditional land of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, and the Métis government for Districts 5 and 6, and just to acknowledge and honor all those who make their home in the Treaty 7 region here in southern Alberta.
Thank you, Megan. And so for some of our international listeners, you may not realize the value that this has to us as folks who are, were born of settlers, people that came to the indigenous lands. It's really important for us here in Canada that we are practicing in the spirit of reconciliation. We had 94 calls to action in our Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and we want to, we can't undo the past, but we want to live well in the past and to honor our indigenous neighbors, our land keepers, and work together for reconciliation. And so there's lots on the web if anyone's interested in learning, and we're all at different journeys in our reconciliation practice. So if what I've described is not yours, that's okay. We're all seeking to do better. So, and we create a psychologically safe space for everyone. And so the organizations that we belong to, we practice reconciliation to the best of our ability, and we're always hoping to get better. So I hope that's been your experience, Megan.
It has. I've noticed quite a commitment in multiple organizations across Canada that I've had the privilege of working with over the past, quite a few years. But I'd say within the past 5 to 10 years, a huge focus on reconciliation. And that's where it starts. We have to acknowledge and also continue on our own learning journey.
And I think it's a journey of all types. When we're approaching psychological health and safety in organizations, there are organizations that are just barely getting started. There are organizations that are really advanced in their practices. And so reconciliation is one of those. And I see it happening within organizations. And some organizations will focus on diversity, equity, inclusion. Some will focus more on indigenous relations, reconciliation. Some people are doing lots of different things, but it creates psychological safety for all the folks who are involved. And so I love it. I love being in environments where we do practice inclusion and reconciliation. So, but Megan, we didn't come to talk about reconciliation today. We came to talk about you and your experience. Can you introduce yourself for our listeners and viewers and let us know sort of the winding path that you've taken that brings you into psychological health and safety practice?
I sure can, Ian, and I'm giggling because, as you said, winding journey. I'm like, okay, people, buckle up, get your passport. Uh, I have definitely been on a journey. It really started when I took a kinesiology degree at the University of Alberta, and I was that odd kid who does not like ball sports. I don't like spherical objects thrown at my face. And so I was not going to be a coach. I was not going to be an athletic therapist. I didn't want to, well, I did want to be a teacher, but I thought I need a specialty. I was so excited about how do we help people live their best lives? How do we get them to enjoy moving their bodies, eat well? Maybe you're not a sports person, but exercise and being active can still be something that's in your life. So I ended up in this stream called Active Living, Health and Well-Being, which later I realized was health promotion, but it had been tucked into kinesiology departments because it didn't have a full platform yet. So that's important because you'll see where I ended up. Buckle up. So while I was doing my undergrad, I ended up working in Europe in the summers, and I worked for an international summer camp. And I have to say that a lot of the healthy workplace habits that I picked up and honed in on were because in my early adulthood years, I was in this European culture of, whoa, North American, slow down. We take a 2-hour siesta. We sit down and have lunch together. The stores are closed. Why do you need to go shopping at lunch? It is Sunday. Nothing is open. And just the way in which that organization treated us as their staff was top class. And we were so valued. We also worked really hard, but we worked really hard because we were well taken care of. And so that stuck with me when I inevitably ended up in California, where I took an after degree in education. It's funny when you go international, you end up meeting people and it takes you places. Yeah. So that was my next experience, was teaching in Northern California. And I also had a different experience in education where we had protected recesses. The school culture I was in, everyone took a lunch. There was a dedicated phys ed teacher. Coaches were paid to coach. Extracurricular activities were not expected of teachers. So they had a different kind of autonomy. And if there are any teachers in Alberta listening, I'm sure you're like, what? So it was a very different culture that I was introduced to. Fast forward to about, I'm probably dating myself here, about 2010, I ended up back in Canada, and it was really difficult to get a teaching job. So I ended up working in a benefit space where my job was promoting health and well-being for educators in the province of Alberta. So I was part of a health promotion team. There it comes back again. And at the time, we were very focused on physical activity, nutrition, and mental health, but mental health kind of I want to say small m mental health because we were still really working on stigma at that point. And it was around that time, I think the shift was, I don't hold me to it, but I'm thinking about 2013, 2014. The organization I was working with saw a shift from physical health disability claims to mental health disability claims being the highest percentage of disability claims. And that's about the time that the national standard came out, 2013, as we know. So this team was sent to training. We all went to the psychological health and safety training, and it ignited a passion in me. I was like, this is it. These are the words to describe what happens at work that I haven't had before, but I knew were a problem and were affecting me day to day and affecting others. It clicked, especially the psychosocial factors. They just live in my heart day to day. So with that information, with that passion and motivation, I decided to go back to school. So I ended up at the School of Public Health, University of Alberta, to work on a master's and a thesis in health promotion. I am happy to say I defended that thesis in August and graduated this November.
Congratulations.
Thanks, Ian. and my thesis was on psychological health and safety in the workplace and the effect on the effects or interpretive understanding of the effects of mental health during COVID-19 for an organization here in Alberta.
Wow. And so, winding road, buckler seatbelts, you experienced really great job quality in Europe, and I can testify, I've been there and lived there, that yes, life is different. Go to California, dramatically different. I'm guessing you were working in a private school?
Public
school. Okay. Yeah. And then back to Alberta. And so As you've gotten into psychological health and safety, then you've worked with different organizations throughout your career. And what has your sort of practice been like? Have you been like parachuting in as a consultant? Are you there as an educator? What's been your role in helping bring others along in psychological health and safety?
Oh, that's such a good question, Ian. I've had a number of roles. I've been very I'd say privileged to be brought into organizations as a consultant, as an external consultant, as an internal consultant on HR teams, as a service provider, part of people's benefit plans, and also as an educator or facilitator of learning about psychological safety. I've also been lucky enough. I worked for the Canadian Mental Health Association and the Alberta division. And in that role, I was a national trainer for the psychological health and safety standards. So I got really into it because I loved it so much. And I think the piece that I really take home about psychological safety is differentiating between what is an organization's role in the well-being of their employees and what is the employee's well-being responsibilities, because it's shared. And my supervisor from the School of Public Health always says that, and I use always for real because she says this a lot, is that we affect the environment and the environment affects us. Sometimes there's varying intensities about how much you can impact an environment and how much an environment can impact you. And usually a big organization is going to have a greater impact on you than you can have on the organization unless you're in certain positions. What I love about psychological safety is that it supports organizations in understanding their role. Their role isn't to nitpick employees on, oh, eat this, eat that, do this for physical activity. It's to create the conditions for employees to be able to choose what works for them and their well-being. And I feel like that just takes a big lift of pressure off of an organization when they are focusing on so many things. Um, and and I guess the other piece, I know I'm going on this one, is that most organizations are already doing a lot. They just don't realize that it's a psychological safety measure. And I think if they did, um, how they promote it, how they talk about it, and how they value it might shift enough to make a big difference in how it lands with their employees.
But you're right in that when we look at employee well-being, it's really big. And you're like, as an employer, what can I do? There's so much I don't have control. I don't have control over genetics, the people's personal health choices, what's going on at home. But they do have control over the work factors at work. And yes, the 13 psychosocial factors that were in the National Standard of Canada, there's different lists of workplace factors, UK management standards in Australia and the model regulations. Canada chose these 13 factors, but it gave us names to be able to start putting things in conceptual buckets around civility and respect, or our organizational climate, psychological support, psychological safety, workload, different things we put in the buckets and say, okay, yeah, we can sort of chew on these and we can work with these now. And these factors are incredibly important as we interact in the workplace. So as you come into workplaces, then you've come in lots of different roles: service provider, consultant, internal consultant, helping with people's benefits. But when you come into environments and you're trying to help the organization focus on what it can do and move things in action, like moving from inaction to action and putting things into play, what do you find is important? Because getting started is hard.
Totally. Totally. And being new is hard. Being new is difficult. And being new is received differently in different places. And what is normal for bringing someone new on board, whether you're external or internal, will change place to place as well. So I think, first of all, if we're going to look at the shared responsibility of psychological safety, I have to check myself and think, I'm coming into a new environment. I want to come in here with the highest respect and regard for the current system, the people who run that system, the people who may have built that system or are responsible for running that system. I don't know if it does anybody any good to come in and just want to rip down the walls, because you end up creating a psychosocial risk because you have unprecedented change or unplanned change or uncontrolled change. So that's me first, is my mindset. I'm new. I'm coming into this organization to see what do you have? So I like to come in with that mind of curiosity. And curiosity, because I guess I'm a bit of a nerd, leads me to the data. I want to see your data. I want to know, what do you have? What do you keep track of? What are you willing and open to share? And what are you okay with somebody looking at? And knowing that you might not like what they find, or you know what they're going to find and you don't like it. It's vulnerable space for an employer. It's a vulnerable space for a consultant, internal or external, because that data is not just numbers, it's people, it's lived experience. There's a whole story behind even absentee rates or turnover rates, or the benefit usage. There's personal stories in those collective numbers. So that respect and curiosity would be the two big things of where do you start.
Because you're coming into an organization, if you're new and they've hired you as an internal employee, you're new and you're a bit of a guest. But then when we're thinking about the fact that you're interacting and asking them to say, can you reveal the scars? Can you reveal the things that you're not really proud of, the things that are really difficult, that are tripping up the organization? Can we partner together? And I think that's one of the real benefits when I speak with external consultants versus internal consultants, is that when folks are internal, there is a certain higher level of trust. And there's a trust of, we're here for the long haul, we're here together. This is a long engagement, as opposed to, we're just having you come in for a one-off seminar, or we're just coming for you to teach us about psychological health and safety, but we're maybe not going to buy it. But when you're internal, essentially they've bought it. And so you come in with that mindset. Then what do you typically see, or what's been your experience? Is it all like roses?
I think what I see time and time again is the importance of relationships. And Ian, I know this is something you and I have spoken about before. And even the fact that we are here today is because of a relationship. And I think what I continue to learn is that our relationships cannot be transactional, or just about a transaction. Transactions happen. But in that spirit, as you said, of reconciliation as part of psychological safety, um, relationships are meant to be authentic. They may vary in length. Some are short, some are long, some are interrupted over time. But I think the most important part is getting to know the people in the organization, the people who have those lived experiences. What does it mean to them? They're not just a number. The number might lead you to them, or they might have the numbers that you need to do your job. But at the end of the day, their lived experience and their story is going to tell you way more than that number ever will. Because a number without context is just a number. So we need to frame the numbers, we need to frame the context, and you really only get that through understanding and really knowing the people who work in that organization in a meaningful way, and not just I just need to get something from you and then see ya.
Right. So many layers, though, because you're talking about the relationships that you're forming in, say, the human resources area or a safety area. And those numbers and the data that they have are real life people who are on the front line of an organization. And maybe the organization has 5, 6, 10 levels deep. It could be an organization of 100, or it could be an organization of 10,000. But those numbers represent people. As you understand where your conversation partner is coming from, these people that you're working with, the numbers, that obviously leverages some relationship capital. But you talk about loving data. You're a nerd. You love data. So how do you bridge that gap between, okay, we've got a personal relationship and you've got data. Now show me your data.
Well, here's the funny thing, Ian, is I'm a data nerd for qualitative data.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah.
So I want your story. Because I want to know about you, and my curiosity is about a lived experience versus maybe a number. Because I often find that the numbers sometimes don't represent that story, or we lose the story in the numbers. And again, I'm not not that I want to create relationships so people will tell me their secrets and then I walk away. It's that it's kind of a win-win scenario where I'm genuinely curious about somebody's experience and who they are and what it's like to be them in an organization. And then I like to see how does that fall within the other stories that I'm hearing, and it paints a beautiful picture, a mosaic of what it's like to be in that organization. So yeah, it's a delicate balance because I I don't I don't want it to be transactional. So I'm very intentional about the relationships that I engage in. And if I am connected with into somebody, it's it's starting where they're at. And we may not get to their story. They may never share their story with me, and that's okay because that relationship in and of itself is valuable and tells us something outside of maybe the data as well. And who are we at work if we're not connected to other people, because work is innately social and human.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow Flourish DX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the Flourish DX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
So you're forming a relationship with, the people that you're coming into the organization with who hold the data, who know what the data means, but you can't, from a qualitative perspective, really understand what's going on very distal to that data. So if you've got, say, an organization of 1,000 people and they roll up their numbers in work locations, and all those work locations aggregate to, a sum of, different variables, we can really get lost in the qualitative meaning of that because, well, let's face it, surveys represent factors, there's numbers. You're forming trust at the level of the work group that you're working with. So I guess, are there some values or some well-worn, well-used assumptions that you are following that help you to put the rest of that data in context? Because you can't, we do qualitative studies with groups of 30, 20. We achieve thematic saturation and we don't need to go any farther. But when you're working then with that large organization and that, where does what values and things guide you in that then?
Yeah, and that's such a good question. I actually ended up getting this question in my thesis defense because, again, I did a small qualitative study, and I had someone from organizational psychology on my panel. And their question was along the lines of, we usually do quantitative studies in organizations. And because numbers speak, and that's what our organizations want to hear, and we can quantify it, and you hear quantify a lot. And I told him he's 100% right. You actually can't do a good job without the numbers. You need a mix of qualitative and quantitative. So you need to figure out how to get employee voice as part of your data collection. And that can be done through things like quantitative surveys with a qualitative aspect to them. I think the relationship or the stories that we get in forming relationships on more of a informal way. So it's, when I'm creating a relationship with somebody in human resources who looks at all the data, I'm not just asking for their story and using their story as data. It's more, I want to connect with them. I want a working relationship with this person. I actually want to get to know them. What makes them tick? What's exciting that we can work together? And that makes the work easier. So the sharing of the data is a little bit easier. And I'm not quite getting at your question here, but it's a roundabout way. So that I think the philosophy that I use is that standalone data is not as helpful as contextual data. And for those stories to make sense, you need the context of the numbers. And the numbers in some places are a starting point in how do you determine what context you need in order to make those numbers make sense? And who can you ask to get that context?
Just retracing our steps.
I know.
Coming to an organization, forming a relationship is incredibly important, because you need to be able to understand what is the context in and around this data. Not even just, where was the data collected in the fiscal year, or what was the season of work, but really what were people expressing, what was the gut feeling from this, and sometimes being able to go back to the data. And so I can sense, on one hand, you've got the relationship capital of psychological safety, so using the Amy Edmondson definition of psychological safety, ability to speak up, to speak hard truths, to be able to work together within that work group of what does the data mean. But then you're also, I'm imagining on that level, saying this data is not favorable. Can we explore together what this data means? Is that something that comes up?
I think it depends. I think, like you said, exposing the scars of an organization, whether it be one that you're coming into as a consultant or one as an internal. I think what I like about the approach of the national standard in assembling the pieces is the idea of framing the scars as opportunities and not as big bad places and dark corners that we've been missing. It's more, hey, what I've noticed and what I've collected and understood. Sorry about this light that keeps chasing me here. Is what I've noticed about this data that I've collected is that you're doing all these amazing things. You have these amazing strengths that are going to take you places. Here are a couple things we can do that is going to leverage your strength, but also bridge some places that we hear either your people are asking for or your data is showing that we need. And I think how you go about that really depends on the data that you're given access to, what the data is telling you, and also the stories around that data. So what you're also seeing in the environment. And does what you see in the environment match what's being told in the data, either by numbers or by the people who are submitting qualitative responses?
How do you match that up? How do you determine if the data is actually representing what's going on?
I know I give it a shrug. I'm like, well, sometimes you just have to be in that environment and notice, is there an inconsistency? Have you looked at all of this, say, employee feedback that they've provided, but you don't see any evidence at all in the workspace? You have to wonder, that's where the context comes in. Was this a time and place when the organization was going through change? And employees were feeling this, but they're no longer feeling this because, again, it's capturing a moment in time, those employee surveys. So it may no longer be an issue. So you might have to go back in time, or go back, take what was given to you back in time and come to the future and either ask the question again, or start to do some digging and say, hey, around 1998, we had this response from a report and we were hearing this story. Is that still true, or what has changed since then? And see what people say and see if you can match up. Oh, they added this, or the organization got really good at involvement and influence in the organization. That's no longer an issue. So that could be an example of something that you showcase to them as changing over time through focusing on a psychosocial factor.
I think most of our listeners weren't working in 1998. Maybe some of them were.
I wasn't, but hey.
Yeah. Yes, I was doing my undergrad in 1998. But you speak to that the survey data could be 3, 4, 5 months old. And you're saying to folks, well, what was going on at this time? As you try to drill down and understand and say, do I observe that same thing happening in this environment? Of course, that's necessary to bring people along with the change to say, here's what's going on in the environment. Here's what I observe as an outsider. I'm just sort of curious. why do we see what we see, and where could we go? I see all these strengths of things that we might leverage that we're doing well, but where do we go from here? So you're right, you're mixing the qualitative and the quantitative data to get things done. But what you're saying, though, is that you leverage the relationship and trust that was generated earlier. If you don't generate that trust, what happens to your access to data then?
Um, I mean, based on your job, we've all worked with people that we know we just have to report to or give data to. Um, I think, on a personal level, it can make work way less fun. And what's the point? Well, I mean, work always has its sticking points, but we're trying to make work better, and work becomes better when we are comfortable with managing relationships and the ups and downs of relationships too, Ian. I think that's also really important. Now that you've mentioned it, I think something that some organizations do really well, and I would say most are dipping their toe into, is the idea of how do we manage conflict resolution and workplace restoration. Because if we're going to talk about relationships and actual relationships, we have to expect that at some point someone's going to have a rub or something's going to go wrong. So I don't know. It leads into a whole other conversation in that realm too.
Well, it does. So when we're coming into an organization, we're looking to say, what is the state of psychological health and safety? And so that is like vast amounts of things. And so quite often, I think, from a research lens, I think of, well, what's going on with burnout or with the rates of depression and anxiety? Are we, creating conditions that really harm employees? So that's like this top level outcome or symptom that we'd see. But if we start to dig and understand, we've got the relationships, we dig and understand that we actually don't work well together and we don't resolve differences. And that's sort of an essential behavior that, like maybe 3 or 4 questions on the Copenhagen Psychosocial Survey might target, but the trust that's created as you inquire and get to the bottom of it says, well, yeah, we can change how we work together. And that may actually yield quite a few differences. So it may touch on the civility and respect. It may touch on workload because we can actually do workload better. It would go certainly onto leadership expectations, so clear leadership and expectations, involvement and influence. So maybe the psychosocial factors that we know can improve work life. And then we're trusting, okay, it's going to make a difference to these top level data that we are drawing from.
Yes, for sure.
Sounds so
And
simple.
right? Yeah. But I have a question for you, and this one might seem a little esoteric, but could you imagine if you started in an organization where you got there and they said, hey, welcome. We're an organization that values relationships. We know that people are really good at building relationships. We recognized early on in our journey that people are not so good at what to do when a relationship takes a turn south or to a place that isn't great. People become uncomfortable. They don't know quite how to repair it. And we notice that those rifts end up running deep and long the longer that they are left. And if a couple of people have rifts in the organization and they're there for their whole career, we notice that it caused some big issues in the organization. So what we've decided and what we implemented, say 5-10 years ago, is a workplace restoration strategy. So we know we have a human organization. We're all human. We know relationships are fragile, ongoing. They can be repaired, and we have a process for repair. It's the first thing we'd like to train you in, is how we repair relationships when things start to maybe go a different way, so that you know how to adjust and get back on track with the people you're working with for our common vision and goal.
Wow. That would be amazing. No kidding. I think our listeners would say that is amazing. And if people could walk the talk, that would create such an amazing environment for collaboration and problem solving, and would likely be a high achieving environment. So, are you describing a mythical unicorn?
Yes, I am. I don't
Okay.
know this organization. This is let's call this Hunter Creative. Do you want to be one of my employees?
Oh, sure. Y'all can work for that for sure.
Yeah. I just think we hold ourselves to this place where we're likely going to fail if we believe that we're never going to misstep in a relationship.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I did some consulting to an organization, and I'm going to paraphrase the values, where some of their values and their intent statements were to always assume positive intent, to not be an a-hole, fail forward, fail fast. Right? Values like that, when we can continually put them in front of us, bring back that human aspect of work to say that, hey, you know what, we're all fallible, we're going to trip up, but we're going to work together, we're going to lean on each other, and bring up those values continuously will create that organizational culture that we're looking for.
I love that. And I think that is almost maybe a more succinct and potentially reasonable way to go about it.
Right. But I don't imagine, so if you want to flip that on its ear, Hunter, creative is not in existence. I'm trying to think of a more clever name for that, but destructive creative is, destructing and imploding from within. And they say we recognize that we're stressed out, that we're burned out, that we're working as individuals, we're not working as a team. How do we apply some values? How do we come up with some team value statements? And they work together. That would be a customized intervention that would only be derived from that qualitative data. So you talk about, if we want to talk about layers of trust, and I'm sure there's an organizational psychologist out there who's done some research in this area, but the idea that we form relationships as individuals, we're working in HR or safety together, we form relationships, we dig down, we see like what's going on in our field of 100 or 10,000 employees, and then we come and we sit with those folks, or we enter those environments and have a sample of, well, what does this feel like here on the ground? Let's understand the context here. And then the next step would be, let's participate together to create a solution that would actually work for us.
Yeah, for sure. And you might start with the data from, say, human resources, where you're tracking what are the interpersonal rubs that are happening. Maybe not on an individual basis, but what are the themes there? So if you had your people who receive these complaints, whether it be an external organization like a employee family assistance plan or your short or long-term disability providers, if they could start to send you, we saw evidence, or we had claims of this, this, and this, and you can take that data and then start to see, are there themes that we're seeing, and we could pinpoint that, oh, we actually have an organization that our managers almost care too much, and they've gotten to a place where maybe employees feel that their privacy is being breached because the managers were trained in so much mental health that they're trying to be therapists, which they're not supposed to be. So again, I think, like you said, leaning on that data can help you match the intervention to what exactly that organization needs. Because it might not be a workplace bullying issue. It might just be, hey, managers, we trained you on mental health and you're doing such a good job. We also want to take it off your shoulders that you don't have to be the therapist. Your job is just to offer resources. And they're like, oh, okay, that's great. That's a solution I didn't see. And they might have been overworking at the expense of an employee feeling comfortable in that space. But we don't know unless the data tells us or leads us there.
But when the data says something, and the leaders of the area, the internal consultant, go and make their way to the shop floor. And so I have this image in my mind of a factory where, the management sits up on the second floor and they walk down the middle staircase down to the shop floor. I know in the city where I am, City Hall is referred to as the Ivory Tower because I believe it's about 14 floors and it's a white building. And many city workers refer to it as the Ivory Tower. And Jay Lamont, a previous guest, works there and we'll joke about that. But when leaders go to the shop floor, the coal face, so to speak, earlier you talked about your own mindset of coming in with curiosity, with openness. What do you think a leader is experiencing as they understand that the quantitative data that they've received or some of the qualitative data they've received is not necessarily favorable? And they're going to the shop floor, they're going essentially to mix and mingle with the employees, or they're going to a focus group. What do you think they experience as they go there?
Oh, so I think I have an empathetic soul in the sense that I feel that leadership, especially executive leadership, any level of leadership, is very difficult because you have the formal authority that changes the space when you walk into it. Do you remember that show Undercover Boss? It's kind of the only way to get an authentic response from an employee. Um, And as leadership, I think, especially when you have that, you say ivory tower, I think they have sort of a lighthouse view of what's going on. So maybe there's a boat over here that's kind of bobbing and sinking a little bit, but for the most part, all of the other boats are above water and doing what they need to do and seem like they're going in the right direction. Um, as a leader, you are seeing something that the other people from their boat vantage point can't see. And so I think as a leader, coming down into that space and having that visibility on the shop floor, as you say, is important. However, I would say you have to, but I don't want to be prescriptive about it. But I think leaders who can adjust their expectations to, I know that I change the space when I'm here. And most leaders are that self-aware and emotionally intelligent to know that. But the more that they can be there, the more it normalizes their presence. And I know that that could be really tough if you have 1,100 sites spread across 3 continents. You might not be able to be in all places at once. But you can start to build that network of trust with the leaders who are in those sites and get them to do the same thing. Because when you're in leadership, your job is, as a people leader, your job is the people. That is your work. The people are your work. And so the more we can get leaders who can come onto a space, normalize their presence in that space, they become part of that culture. Just like I said in the beginning, we influence a culture and a culture influences us. But if we are not present in that culture, we have no influence. We can just see it. So I would encourage leaders at every level within reason of their role and responsibility to go out there and get on a boat every now and again. And maybe you get on a boat, come back to your lighthouse, and then get on another boat, come back to your lighthouse, get on a boat, come back to your lighthouse, and start to map out, what am I seeing? And okay, this boat's bobbing over here, but had I not hopped on this other boat, I wouldn't realize that they're actually really low on fuel and about to turn in the wrong direction. So that actual in the space experience is invaluable, but your reason for being there is probably more important than what you're expecting people to tell you.
So what you have painted a picture at Hunter Creative is leaders who are self-aware, who understand their positional authority and where they fit in the culture, and they're setting that aside to be able to gather great qualitative data where they're at. And we know that's not always the case, but what you're pointing to is that leader setting the pace is incredibly important, that they're going to be able to gather that data as they get there. Do you think that some leaders avoid that because they just don't have the confidence that they can hear, or I guess not necessarily hear, but that they can action and do something with the concerns that they hear on the front line on the shop floor?
That's such a, I don't know. That's just something that I think is so individual. I'm sure it's a fear that comes up in leaders. But my guess, especially when you get into the higher decision making, higher levels of leadership, it's that they're putting out fires, is that they're constantly busy and they're needed for everything. And depending on how your organization is laid out, if you have a pyramid where they're the decision maker for everything, that person's time is so valuable that it would be very difficult to say, hey, wait a second, I need to step out and I need to get on a boat and then I'm going to come back. Organizations that have more of a lattice, I've recently heard this term and I loved it, that the idea that as long as you're getting permission from somebody above you to do something and those people are communicating up, you're good. Those lattice organizations allow the leadership or the higher leadership to have that ability to be a bit more integrated and on the ground and known and have their presence felt with across the organization because their time has been freed up. So it depends on how an organization is built, and it depends on that leader and what they value, and also what fires are coming their way that they are extinguishing at any given time.
Right. So if we were to zoom back out, what you've painted the picture of is that as we interact with each other, the fact of psychological safety between us, between team members, is incredibly important, because the actions that are taken by a company, an organization, a group to make real change don't just happen because there was a survey and let's action it. So engagement survey, action plan. What happened? Nothing happened. Okay, well, it's another survey, another action plan. And that stuff doesn't occur, or doesn't actually happen properly without those conditions of trust. And now we haven't based this on, a meta-analysis of 100, studies covering 100,000 research subjects. You're saying this based on your intuitive experience as you've worked with organizations. And obviously that's the sort of stuff we have to trust and go on, that we have leaders who can establish psychological safety. There's lots of good research behind that. And so as you go into organizations, that trust that you start to generate, so you talk about the organization affects you, but you affect the organization, is that you're affecting the organization, creating that ability to share data, to be able to talk about the hard data, to be able to go to the shop floor, so to speak, and contextualize the data. And we haven't even talked about, creating participatory type interventions, but that way of conducting yourself and the team conducts itself, you say, are incredibly important.
Yeah, I do. I think it's acting within our sphere of control and allowing and expecting the organization to do the same, and understanding what an organization can and cannot do for us is also really important.
Yeah, because we're working with humans, right? And we all respond to our environment. And so you're talking about creating the context for the best response possible.
Absolutely. You summed that up really well, Ian.
Well,
thank you.
One of my roles in life has been a therapist to reflectively listen and summarize and then move to action. So if you're looking at this field, though, and someone is looking to get started in the field of psychological health and safety, what advice would you give them?
Oh, so much. Is honestly to understand the standards that exist and get to know how you personally interact with the psychosocial factors if you're using the Canadian one. And there are 15 if you're working in healthcare, 13 if you're working in most other industries. But those two in healthcare, oh, I know, we can have another conversation. Those two in healthcare are worth knowing because I think they have application in other spaces. So I would say it's really about understanding the impact that those psychosocial factors could have, getting curious as you get into an organization, and to begin to map out what data do you need, or what data can you ask for to start to build out a story that will show where that organization is doing well, and then allow them the opportunity to look at a few places that if they focused a little bit of energy or tweaked or did this, they could see some results and how they'd see those results. So how you're going to track that data or those implementation practices moving forward. So your own self-understanding and knowledge of the standard, what data you would need or want to know in order to build a picture, focus on strengths, provide some action steps for opportunity and how they'd evaluate it.
Wow. Yeah. Sometimes
It's
I
a
think
lot.
but sometimes I think that, Solomon was correct when he said there was nothing new under the sun. Said that in Ecclesiastes. Because I think culturally there's a lot of things that come up and we have to sift it and we have to understand it ourselves. So I think of going way back to Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There's those internal private habits of knowing yourself and knowing what's going on, identifying your biases. He didn't talk about biases back then, but we talk about unconscious bias now. What are the unconscious biases that I bring into the different components of the standard? And the psychosocial factors in the standard are merely conceptual buckets to try to contain ideas and break them down a little bit. Knowing how do these interact for me, and then how do I look at these in the environment? How can I be curious and not take my assumptions, but what pieces, what symptoms, what data am I going to look for that will help me form an idea? So, the big Q idea of qualitative research, of letting the data show me what's there. But you say, do a bite-sized, manageable project so it doesn't get overwhelmed. So for someone starting in the area, it's so incredibly important. Because we need more people doing this work.
We do.
Yeah.
We 100% do. And the thing about a standard is that they can be, and I hope I can say this on here, but a standard can be really unsexy for most people. It's like,
totally.
Cool, thanks. So bringing a standard into an organization, you need to want to bring it to life in a meaningful way to people, in a way that only you can do. So find your version of, hey, this is important because likely the organization is not going to want to read tooth and comb another standard. You need to show them why it's important. So you need to have a deep understanding of why it's important. For me, my why is that work is social, work is about people, and we're human. And we all deserve those conditions that allow us to participate in our health and well-being. And when we hold up our responsibility and the organization holds up their responsibility, people are more well to do better work. End of story.
That's quotable. We all deserve an environment that allows us to participate in our well-being. That's awesome. Okay, I can see that one coming up on a meme, signed with Megan Hunter, Hunter Creative. See it all come together for you.
Well, yeah, I'll put that in my backpack and I'll have to give you credit for it, Ian. We'll talk about it offline.
Yeah, we'll see who gets to trademark that one first. Okay, well, thanks so much for joining me. I know this episode was a long time in the making since our paths crossed in person in Alberta at the Working Stronger conference this fall. And we've known each other online a little bit longer. And that's the one great thing about LinkedIn, is that LinkedIn, this is not a promo for Microsoft and LinkedIn, but LinkedIn has literally benefited me personally, getting to know researchers all across the continent. Well, I shouldn't say all across the continent. Australia, United States, Canada, UK, into Denmark. And when people are posting things, and with the help of Google Translate, you can read each other's reports sometimes. And so we use LinkedIn quite a bit on the podcast here. So if you've liked this episode, please share it. Let your colleagues know. We think that these podcasts are a really light way to listen, but we want to rapidly advance the knowledge of psychological health and safety. And we've been using that phrase rapidly advance now throughout the life of the podcast, which I think is 4 or 5 years. But just like we needed to get to know physical factors like ergonomics and lifting, we have to get out there. This is what a great work environment looks like. So whether we line it up with the psychosocial factors, we talk about work design or other things, we are rapidly advancing and improving people's knowledge. So if you've liked this, please share it, please tag it, please talk about it. And this podcast does air on all the great podcast platforms, as well as we have YouTube. We try to shorten down a few clips. We advertise on LinkedIn. But anyways, so Megan, if people want to follow you, get to know you more, how would you like them to connect with you?
I would say LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. It's Megan K Hunter, and the picture will be the same one used here on the podcast. So, yeah, follow me there. I would be happy to connect. And I just want to put a plug, as you said, about social. If you're interested and don't know where to start, look for your local psychological health and safety community. I know here in Alberta, that one is run through the Canadian Mental Health Association Alberta division. So reach out to their Working Stronger team and they'll get you hooked in. They meet, I think, once every 6 weeks. So, yeah.
Awesome. And I've heard about that community of practice, and it sounds so great. We don't have one here in Saskatchewan, so I guess it's up to me, like, hey, let's get it going, because there are practitioners. And that's another encouragement to people who are listening to the podcast, is that reach out and connect. Maybe you don't identify with anything that Megan or I have talked about, but there's someone else online that you follow that you think is really great. Reach out. We're all humans. Everyone puts their pants on one leg at a time. I can say that back in 2020, I reached out to a real prominent Canadian influencer, and she made time to meet with me. We did a Zoom call together. She encouraged me in my career, and there's been many people along the way that I cold called and reached out to online, and they have helped propel my knowledge. And it's not about me. It's the fact that now I'm a much better human serving some other humans. So we can all do better for each other.
I love that.
All
That's
right.
awesome, Ian.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining me. And I look forward to chatting more in the future, Megan.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.